Channel open. Welcome back to WeeklyTrek, a proud member of the Tricorder Transmissions podcast network and presented in partnership with TrekCore.com. I am your host, Alex Perry.
What's today's date? The date.
Today's show was recorded on July 14th, 2023, and is current through the Star Trek Strange New Worlds episode Charades, so beware of spoilers. All right, let's get into the show.
Good day, Voyager, and welcome to A Briefing with Neelix. It's a catchy title, isn't it?
WeeklyTrek is a regular news show covering the biggest stories from the Star Trek franchise. We are in the Alex Kurtzman era of Star Trek with the 12th television show and the 14th movie currently in production, and merchandise continuing to fill the Bajoran wormhole. So stick with me and I'll help you sort the real facts from lots of the Dominion propaganda that you'll find online. But I can't do this alone, and my guest this week is returning guest and co-host of the Shore Leave podcast. It's Marina Kravchuk. Marina, welcome back to WeeklyTrek.
Thank you for having me back. It's wonderful to return.
Well, you know, it's funny, Marina, we were just joking before you jumped on. Normally I have you on in a week where we have things convention related to talk about.
Yeah.
And this week I booked you and I was like, oh, we don't have a convention topic. And then our top stories tonight ended up being a convention topic. So fate intervened to ensure that you and I would get the opportunity to talk about conventions tonight, which I'm looking forward to.
Yeah, very much so.
But before we get to that, you know the drill. I want to know something that's got you excited about Star Trek at the moment. What's got you moving at Warp 10?
At the moment, you know, it's a weird sort of a double thing happening.
Okay.
Because of the news that we're going to be talking about, it's the sort of like, I don't know, being on the edge because, well, we will talk about it. We don't know what's going to happen with some things. On the positive side of things, I finally got to try Shore Leave Convention, which, you know,
yes.
you know, it's the name of my podcast. But it's the fan run convention that's been around for many, many years, definitely over 30. It's a fan run event. I've always heard wonderful, wonderful things about it. And I always had a conflict of some sort, whether it's going to be something happening with the family or professionally, and I could never go. And it's you know, it's traditionally in July, so it's seemingly like middle of the summer, you know, should be easy. And it finally happened. My sister and I drove down to Maryland and had fabulous 2.5 days, you know, hanging with my friends. So I'm still kind of like riding the high from that particular event and sort of like trying to stay as enthusiastic and happy as I can because I am so looking forward to Las Vegas. And here we are hanging on the precipice.
Yeah, I love Shore Leave. I was not able to make it this year. I have some like foot problems and I'm resting up for Star Trek Las Vegas. So I wasn't able to make Shore Leave, but I love Shore Leave. I mean, talk about like the best way I could describe Shore Leave to people who've never been there is if you watch the documentary Trekkies and like, you know, they visit a bunch of Star Trek conventions and they're like mid-90s Star Trek conventions with a very specific vibe and a very specific flavor to them. Shore Leave is that in 2023.
But it has moved, well, at least, how should I put this? It has its own thing going. Like, I would not compare it to other fan run events that I've been to because they all have their own little atmospheres. I did, you know, certain things. I've been to a Comic-Con that's sort of like this older 90s style event that kind of felt that way. It felt dated. In the case of Shore Leave, it did not feel. I mean, certain things like, I have suggestions if anybody's interested in hearing them about how certain things can be done, probably a little bit, I don't know, updated with the times. But bottom line is like, you know, you go into the vendor's room, it doesn't feel like, oh my goodness, all of this is like 100 years old. No, the vendor room is exciting. You know, you have fan discussions happening everywhere. People are just generally chilling. Like, seriously, the only thing, major downside to the whole weekend that we had there was it just that the hotel itself. Yeah. The hotel really needs some major upgrades in heating. Well, in this case, heating does not really apply, but the air conditioning and ventilation system. Their HVAC was just not good. It's not a very expressive word, but you know, this is a family show.
I love, you know, honestly, actually, the convention that's given me the closest vibe to Shore Leave, one that actually you and I were both at, was the Long Island Star Trek convention that took place a couple of months ago. That I walked around that and I was like, oh boy, I feel like I'm at like a nascent version of Shore Leave, right? Like if you if you like tripled the crowd, that's pretty much what you'd have. Yeah.
So it's wonderful to see that the older events are still around, you know, like Shore Leave, like Starbase Indy and several others. And they're still there, and what's more, they're trying to move with the fandom. They're not letting themselves become obsolete. And of course, with Trek Long Island, great. We now have new stuff also happening. So let's see how it goes. But let's talk about more pressing things.
Well, before we do that, I'm going to tell you what I'm feeling good about
yes,
Star Trek this week, which is also very pressing things. It's yesterday's episode of Star Trek Strange New Worlds, that being Charades, which I loved. It is my favorite episode of the season so far. It just pips out tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow for me as my number one episode of Strange New Worlds season 2 so far. So basically, this is like Spock Amok Part 2, right? In terms of the 5th episode of the season. It's written by Catherine Lynn, who was also one of the Lower Decks writers before she moved over to Strange New Worlds. And it's a Spock to Prin tale that has hijinks associated with it. I thought this episode was hilarious. Ethan Peck does an absolutely phenomenal job. Gia Sandhu does an absolutely phenomenal job as T'Pring. Jess Bush does a wonderful, amazing job as Nurse Chapel. It just is the whole package of another fun, relatively light episode of Star Trek Strange New Worlds that, alongside Spock Amok, is like, it's a vibe of Star Trek in live action that we haven't gotten much of in a really long time. And Spock Amok was like, capture lightning in a bottle once. Well, Charades is capture lightning in a bottle twice. And I would even say that this week's episode had, where Spock Amok was light and fun, this week's episode had an emotional depth to it that went way beyond Spock Amok, and I think, in my opinion, makes it an even better episode. And Spock Amok was my favorite episode of season 1. Marina, what did you think about Charades?
It's fun. That's the thing. I really enjoy the fact that Star Trek as a whole is capable of producing both, heavy-handed drama at times, but also sometimes something where you just laugh at it. It comes up, as my favorite series is Voyager. How many times when you see Kate Mulgrew do Queen Arachnia, it's a hoot, and it's like it's still Star Trek,
right?
Same deal. It's like you can have this type of fun, which is one of the most wonderful things I think about our particular sci-fi franchise, is that the fact that you can literally hit so many genres within this one whole.
Yeah, it's just really nice, and I think Strange New Worlds season 2 is pumping on all cylinders at this point, and I'm really looking forward to the back 5 episodes of the season.
I can't wait. I mean, having said that, so far out of the first these several episodes, I have to admit that the courtroom one still probably ranks number 1 for me.
I mean, that's a very fair thing to say. It's a great episode.
And we did get to see this, we being the New York area Trekkies, we did get to see it as part of the premiere presentation in the city. So it kind of like, maybe because of that, seeing this on the big screen, it kind of really affected me. But listen, they just keep doing their thing, and I'm really excited to see what's going to be next.
And it's popular, which we'll talk about a little bit later.
Oh, yeah.
All right. Well, with that, let's turn to the week's top stories.
There's a war going on, and I'm a reporter.
Hollywood is on strike. Again, or I guess more than it was before already. The Screen Actors Guild, whose contract expired at the end of last month, walked away from the negotiating table with the AMPTP, the group representing the studios, and has formally gone on strike. The strike by actors, represented by SAG-AFTRA, is in addition to the still ongoing strike by the Writers Guild of America. With both actors and writers now out on the picket lines, Hollywood is well and truly shut down. And what does that mean for Star Trek? Well, Star Trek Strange New Worlds' 3rd season had already been postponed due to the writers' strike and will now not move ahead until both the writers' and actors' strikes have been resolved. Completion of Prodigy's 2nd season was likely well past the recording stage, so likely will not be impacted. And potentially the only show that will be impacted in terms of in current production could be Lower Decks. We know they were recording those episodes a couple of months ago, and if they had not yet finished, and if, depending on what kind of animation project it is, it falls under SAG-AFTRA rules, they would be impacted as the cast would be on the picket lines. But the Star Trek productions are not the only way that you might feel an impact of the actors' strike. There's actually likely to be an impact on conventions as well, and that includes the 57-year Mission Convention coming up in Las Vegas in about 2 weeks from when this episode drops. The Screen Actors Guild rules for conventions are still pretty fresh. They came out literally yesterday from the day we're recording. By the time you hear this, there probably will be more clarity, but we're still operating on only 24 hours of information, and that information has changed quite a bit in the last day. So there's still a lot of interpreting to be done and figuring out exactly what impact it will have. But as of Friday, July 14th, the current rules appear to bar actors who appear at conventions from participating in panels in which they talk about current, future, and past work they have done as SAG members, which would mean for current SAG members appearing at STLV, if they appear on a panel, they likely can't talk about Star Trek on that panel. But it does look like like they can still do autographs and photo ops. Creation Entertainment, who runs the 57-year Mission Convention, otherwise known as STLV, have said that the convention will continue, quote, as planned with the current guidelines in mind. Fans attending one of Creation's Vampire Diaries convention this weekend reported that the actors were not willing to discuss the show in their panel appearances, and actually just half an hour before we started recording, Creation put out a statement saying that in light of the SAG rules, they were asking convention attendees not to ask questions of the actors about the show. They were asking them to think about creative and fun questions that aren't to do with the show. But otherwise, it looks like the convention is proceeding as planned. As I said, when the writers went out on strike, we stand in solidarity with the actors and hope they get the fair contract that they deserve. And while some convention attendees may be disappointed by the restrictions on what actors can say in public appearances about the show, like at STLV in 2 weeks, let's remember that there are lots of reasons to be at a Star Trek convention that have nothing to do with the panels. I know I personally have lots of reasons to be looking forward to STLV this year, and the panels are not all that high on my list. So if you are planning on attending STLV, I look forward to seeing you there. Well, Marina, you are the Tricorder Transmission's Shore Leave co-host, your Star Trek convention podcast. I would love to know your view on the decision by the Screen Actors Guild to go on strike and the impact that you think it will have on conventions.
Absolutely. If you read everything, why they're striking, in this case, it is a very, clear-cut situation. They deserve to be paid fair wages. This whole thing with the AI needs to be figured out somehow, because the most recent thing that I've read about any background actor to be, could be potentially screened and then that's it, paid once, and their image is being used in perpetuity. That's insane. So in this case, yes, this is all completely valid, and I sincerely hope that the big changes will occur. Double strike has not happened in 60 years, and the last time it did happen, I believe that's the time that they invented residuals. So at this point, yes, it's certainly a time for big changes. Having said that, of course, I can totally see, and my God, I have been doing my best not to read too many comments under the incredible multitude of discussions that are currently very passionately being, thrown about online, both on literally on every single platform that I looked at. So I can see why some people could be very upset, especially people who are either newbie attendees. They've never been to conventions, so they were hoping to, okay, this is my first Vegas. I've heard so many things there. They're hoping to get that convention experience where, you can go up to the microphone and ask what the person's, the actor's favorite episode is, or something along those lines. And of course, anyone who's just generally a brand new fan altogether to the fandom. I mean, can you imagine? So yes, there are certainly ways. I mean, especially having the experience with fan run conventions where you don't have as many guests, where you don't have as many Q&As and presentations, where you have a lot of actual fan input and science discussions and what have you. There are ways of turning things around and coming up with wonderful programming where, you're not really explicitly having a discussion about, well, in our case, Star Trek. But generally speaking, there will have to be, as Creation put in their tweet, some creative ways that the fans will have to come up with to ask the guests if we do have actual Q&A panels. Because, think back on it, yes, we have majority of the questions tend to be about Star Trek, but still, STLV, plenty of different people come. A lot of times questions do come up about other work that a particular guest has done, theater work, I've seen you in this, or you did this. And, we're having these conversations about other shows, which now are also not part of permitted subject matter. So I sincerely hope that the union will provide further clarifications, that somebody will say that, when you said no public conventions, not every convention is San Diego Comic-Con or New York Comic-Con. Those are things apart. They're industry events. We're having literally hundreds of events happening every month that have nothing to do with this sort of PR marketing, having giant press junket with guests present and the fans providing this wonderful, exciting background to the whole thing. That's not what convention scene is really like. So hopefully we will hear more. Now, there have been questions thrown at a lot of actors. I've tried to keep track of what's happening primarily on Twitter. I know that Armin Shimmerman actually replied to several folks saying that he doesn't see any reason why there can be a convention if they're literally coming to do a personal appearance for all intents and purposes. It's not, they're not being sent by studio to do any kind of promotion for whichever project, past, present, or future.
But then he later said,
yes,
actually,
because,
I'm not so sure about that anymore, and I'm going to get clarification from the guild.
Which is why, like, I'm actually going to be really, keeping track of his social media, and also Kitty Swink. Both of them are very active in the union, so I'm kind of hoping that, and they know what's what with the conventions. So that's kind of like, they know what kind of question to ask, like what exactly is the actors what they can do during the convention. So we shall see. I know there was Anson was doing almost like a Reddit Ask Me Anything, but on Twitter, and somebody did throw a similar question to him, and his reply was, con appearances are not something that will be, I'm substituting the word because he typed a different one, canceled, assuming con is not being used to promote specific project. Personal appearances are personal appearances. So he's looking at it in a similar fashion as I think I gather most fans who've been to cons, especially if you've been to an industry one versus plain commercial one like a regular Comic-Con, to a fan run convention. Again, we will see. This is the sort of thing. I mean, I have a feeling that a lot of convention hosts, not creation, are probably scrambling to see that if they are going to be put in a situation where you can't do a regular Q&A, what are you going to do and how are you going to do it? I think there's probably ways of doing it. Again, I'm talking sort of from the standpoint of a person who have been to a lot of conventions. So, I don't need to hear Garrett's elbow or Jerry Ryan's elbow story for the 100th time. I mean, I can probably tell it myself at this stage. I can certainly want to have my fellow LTDs, to have never had the experience to have it. But, I can certainly come up with other things to talk to the actors about. But how much would that be an interest to somebody who's literally, freshly coming in, and they do want to talk about Captain Kirk and they want to ask questions to Nana Visitor to discuss Kira or whatever. So I think the next 2 weeks are going to be obviously crucial because San Diego is right there. It's upon us. As we all know already, a lot of things were pulled out because the studios know that they're not going to have anyone presenting their product. And then, of course, Vegas. I hope Creation is going to be transparent and timely in what's happening. And I'm kind of being reminded that this is something that came up with a conversation with one of my friends. 2021, when the whole thing was happening with the first post-pandemic STLV, and Creation was indeed scrambling because a lot of actors were canceling at the last moment, or even as the convention was already ongoing. And they did manage to pull a rabbit out of the hat. And, we had a full convention with over 100 guests. So what's going to happen now? Like I said, we're kind of hanging in the precipice, but we're not going to know probably until, I don't know, within the next 2 weeks. That's my guess, gut feeling.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly sounds like, from what they said today, it's not like there's any prospect under which STLV will not happen, right? I mean, you just have to think about it from the perspective of Creation has a contract with the facility, and, they're going to want to try and retain making as much money as possible. And, right, like, they don't really make a lot of money off of the panels. The place where they make their money is in the autographs and the photo ops. And so if those can still happen, then everybody can have a profitable, or at least a hope as profitable as possible convention, even if the sort of panel experiences are not as, good as one would hope that they would be.
And this particular year, I mean, it has to be said, we have spectacular photo ops.
Yes.
I mean, aside from the usual singular ones, I mean, look at those group photo ops. I have to admit, I broke the bank. I went beyond my usual budget because some of these group photo ops were just too precious to pass up.
Sure.
And I am literally holding all my fingers crossed, hoping that, this will actually happen. And, we cannot fault any of the talent coming in case they decide to cancel for whatever reason.
Correct, yes.
We already have, as of this recording, the first cancellation with James Darren. In his case, of course, it could be health related.
Yeah, I think he said, I saw someone say he actually announced on Instagram like 2 or 3 days ago that he would not be going to Vegas anymore. So that was, presumably not strike related.
I mean, if it's not health, I mean, we have to be mindful. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, I think he's in his late 80s.
Yes, he's an old man.
At this point, it could be quite literally anything. So, best of luck to him. I hope it's nothing serious if it is indeed health related. But yeah, regardless, yes, there is a potential that we might be losing whole casts. And that's what it is, because that's the situation.
Yeah, it's sort of going to be up to each of the actors to make their decision about what they do. I mean, it does sound like there is a permission structure in place that exists for them to attend the convention, with obviously some restrictions on what they can say when they get there, but maybe not restrictions on what they can do in terms of signing autographs.
Yeah.
And taking pictures with fans.
That has come up. Now, again, this is a very, I suppose, dubious veracity. Plenty of creative, artistic people are online. And again, this is mostly all the passionate bubbling that we're having on Twitter still. Quite a few said, somebody, that person who spoke to a convention host, somebody else, booking agent, somebody else spoke to somebody else. It's one of those things where it keeps coming up where people are like, no, you can't go to convention. Like, just do, as Anson called it, a personal appearance.
Right.
It's just as long as you're not talking about your work.
Yeah.
Again, work that falls within the SAG-AFTRA contracts. If it's something independent, I'm sure that shouldn't be a problem to talk about. But yeah, it kind of, I keep thinking, that this has come up as like, what can we have instead of Q&A? Like the cruise has a certain percentage of programming that technically is not Q&A. It's not a standard. That's why it's called an unconventional, cruise. It's not a convention. You have cooking shows and you have presentations, you have this and that. Thing is that like it's very limited before it becomes sort of like it's not a Q&A, but it still spills into the performance category, which the actors are not allowed to engage in.
I don't know. After 12 years of doing STLV, I think I don't mind that the actors this year won't get asked what was your favorite episode of Star Trek that you were in for the 57 millionth time.
Absolutely. I mean, there is a multitude of things you can talk about. I mean, nobody precludes you from discussing, we can talk about their craft. Yes, they can't talk about specifics of how it gets used in the form of all the projects and the plays and the films and TV series. But there's still other things. Again, it's a double-edged sword in a way. I'm like, how many actors would actually want to have a somewhat more personal discussions of this sort, because normally at the conventions, everything is about the characters and their work. So we're gonna have that. Like if it were a smaller event, it maybe like some of the actors would be a little bit more. Like I still keep thinking about Towards the Cruise. Cruise only has 3,000 people on board roughly. So and whereas Vegas per day you can have up to 6. So that's a bit of a difference. But again, we're trying to kind of guess something that pretty much nobody has any experience with so far.
And I think also important to say, actors speaking about the show is by no means the only Star Trek related content in a convention, right? You have all of the secondary theater stuff, which is done by not actors, not writers.
We should have
the science stuff,
and
any sort of behind the scenes people, right? Like Writers Guild folks aren't under like even like producery type people like Kevin and Dan Hageman for the co-creators of Star Trek Prodigy are coming. Presumably, they're in Writers Guild of America. They will be able to talk about Prodigy because WGA's rules aren't the same as SAG's about what the writers can and cannot do.
Thank you for bringing this up, because I was thinking about this when they just announced it. And my first thought was, how they tweeted. They're like, oh yeah, we're coming to Vegas. There's a lot to talk about. And then Kate chimed in on Twitter that in reply to this tweet saying like, oh yeah, I'm going to be there. We do have a lot to talk about. And I'm like, isn't that so curious? So now we have this situation where we have a show that is a Star Trek show that the platform technically does not exist. It's not there. It's in the ether, and hopefully all those pre-orders of the DVDs will work out. And so we have a situation where yes, both of Kate is part of SAG and they're part of WGA. Both are on strike. They can't talk about it. She technically can't.
Yeah, right.
So where does this lead? It's like on top of everything else, Prodigy still can't get a damn break.
But I think, regardless of what happens with the actors, there will still be plenty of Star Trek programming at FTLV.
Oh, yes. There's already, if you look online on the special events, I mean, we have movie screenings. We have some panels that kind of tie in Star Trek into it, psychology and Star Trek and various other things. So there's most certainly, in terms of the secondary and tertiary theaters, we'll have plenty of the usual stuff. All the fan-organized events that are happening after the convention hours, all of that is still out there. I have to invite those who are not sure what's going on to join either the Star Trek Convention Experiences group or our sister group, the USS Rio, because there will be the pool party, there will be the Fan Geeks party, there will be the Cool Waters charity event. All of these things are happening still. So as far as like the usual convention activities, excepting that we don't know what's going to happen with Q&A and just, to begin with, who actually is going to show up. Because I don't discount that there's going to be some actors who will not go.
Oh, I'm sure there will be.
Simply out of solidarity. Not so much that they're going to be concerned about what they're doing or not doing. It could be just like, you know what? I'm not doing anything. So, and they're absolutely within their rights to do so.
I'm just glad I didn't pay for a ticket yet for the TNG reunion panel.
what my sister and I are splitting that big TNG photo up.
Oh yeah,
with Terry Metalis and everyone. So I am sitting. I feel like I'm sitting on a hedgehog. But it's just. I hope it all happens. We'll see. We'll see.
We will see. Yeah, I mean, we're 2 weeks away, and this news is 24 hours old, so lots will evolve and change next week and the week after. But regardless, I'm looking forward to STLV. I will be there. STLV will be there. It sounds like Creation Entertainment aren't changing their plans about doing it, and so we'll have the best time possible. Well, Star Trek Strange New Worlds is a hit. The new Nielsen streaming ratings, which debuted last year, were released this week for the premiere week of Star Trek Strange New Worlds, and The Broken Circle ended up coming in 7th place for the week of the top 10 most streamed shows. According to Nielsen, it was streamed for 338 million minutes during that week. This is encouraging for Strange New Worlds, the second Star Trek show to debut on Paramount Plus since the launch of Nielsen's new streaming ratings. Star Trek Picard appeared on the ratings 3 times for its 3rd season, with the series finale placing 9th at 400 million minutes streamed the week of April 20th. You would naturally expect the series finale of Picard to attract a large audience, and so for Strange New Worlds to have clocked in relatively close is a big achievement. It will be interesting to see how and whether it continues to chart each week moving forward, and how viewership changes. Marina, were you pleased to see the appearance of Strange New Worlds' 2nd season premiere on the Nielsen streaming charts?
Yes, absolutely. What's more, I think it's very well deserved. Strange New Worlds, I think it's very nicely placed where they can certainly keep hitting it. If memory serves, Picard entered the new rankings twice. So let's see if Strange New Worlds is actually going to beat this. Maybe they will manage to do so with multiple episodes this particular season. So nice. What's more, it's a little bit, I like statistics. So it's kind of like nice to actually have Nielsen's in some form.
Yes.
Because not have anything, like I keep thinking like Netflix. Netflix still does not provide any kind of indication like, well, what are people watching and how much they're watching it. So nobody really knows what's going on except some bean counters somewhere behind the scenes. It's kind of nice to have this sort of thing. I mean, of course, with the proviso that other calculations being done. It's the famous story that Nielsen's, indicating that Star Trek, the original Star Trek, had to be canceled. Well, there was apparently a mistake where they recalculated numbers. It was like, oh, it was one of the best viewed shows. You canceled the good one. So yeah, this is exciting. This is exciting, and let's see what happens next.
Yeah, I'm super jazzed by this news for a couple of reasons. One, obviously the Nielsen streaming ratings are new. They've only been around for a year, which means that, whole seasons of Discovery, the first season of Strange New Worlds, the first 2 seasons of Picard have come and gone before these ratings have even existed. Obviously, there's the Parrot Analytics charts, which, Larry Nemetrek does those every week. So like
every
if
Tuesday,
you care about those, you can find those over at Trekland Tuesdays. But I've never put much stock in Parrot Analytics. But, Nielsen, right, like they are the people who track viewership of stuff. And so it obviously carries weight when they, come out with a streaming chart. And now, Star Trek Picard appeared 3 times. Strange New Worlds has now appeared once. And I think one of the things that, I've sort of been reflecting on is when Picard showed up for the first time, a lot of the people who are fans of Picard, I think I heard a discussion about this on Inglorious Treksperts or something like that. A lot of the people who were fans of Picard season 3, but maybe were not fans of everything else, right? Ranging from they just weren't fans of it to they actively hated it, sort of pointed to Picard showing up on the streaming ratings and saying, see, we were right all along. Fans want this. They don't want the other stuff that the Star Trek franchise is producing, and therefore this is what the Star Trek franchise should look like going forward, and you should get rid of everything else. And first of all, that wasn't fair from the perspective of many of them were making those claims, not realizing that those Nielsen ratings had only been around for 8 months at that point and hadn't existed, for the previous seasons of Star Trek. The reason Picard was the first to show up was because it was the first to show up, not that any others wouldn't have charted if it had existed then. But now we have the premiere of Strange New Worlds season 2, 338, Picard's series finale being 400. That's pretty close. And I'm really curious to see how this moves week to week. I mean, it definitely, right, based off of the data points that we have today, you can say that Strange New Worlds is a little bit less popular than Picard's 3rd season finale, which is pretty damn popular, right? Like, and implies that it's not that Picard season 3 was some blip of popularity in the Star Trek franchise, that Strange New Worlds is doing just as good of a job as keeping viewers' attention. And that's really great. That's positive for the Star Trek franchise that these shows are successful.
At the end of the day, you do need to have more data. Like once we have these rankings, and if Strange New Worlds will consistently start to get into them, like maybe not with every single episode, but every other one or whatever, that's going to be a little bit more to kind of like say, yes, it is indeed, here's the confirmation, people are watching it. Because generally speaking, this sort of thing, I saw those comments. They were like, yeah, that's it, season 3, the 8, that's what works, that's what everybody wants. It is in many ways a very false comparison, because there's just so much stuff going on with, at least Picard was shown from A to Z, on one platform, and the entire season went from the beginning to the end. I keep coming back to Prodigy. I mean, look at that. Do we really know exactly how many people watched it, how many people could have watched it if it actually had the same thing, where it would not be like, oh, it's a Nickelodeon. Oh, no, it's not a Nickelodeon. I'm in, I'm out. What's happening? Where is it? And now let's show 5 here and then 5 there and then remaining 10 over there. Seriously? So it's all kind of like you can't, one or the other. Having said it, again, it's good to have that we have this system back in some form. Hopefully it will prove a useful metric going forward. Again, we shall see. This is just the beginning. And yeah, so hopefully, Lower Decks will premiere when it's supposed to premiere without delays. We don't know yet. Who knows? Maybe there's going to be some breakout episode there that's going to enter it. And
to merge the news stories together, right? Like, this is one of the things that the writers and the actors are sort of fighting with the studios over, is the fact that for streaming shows, the studios don't release any information about how many people watch it. So are they hiding how popular things are so that they don't have to get into negotiations with actors who are like, well, I'm appearing on one of the most popular shows of all time, you need to pay me what that's worth? Or are they hiding that so few people are watching it because they've all made these big investments into growing these streaming platforms, but the audience isn't coming along with them, that they don't want to, they're trying to hide the fact that sort of the business model as a whole is not terribly successful. I mean, that's one of the areas where obviously I don't think that like either the writers or the actors, whatever eventual deal they make with the studio, will probably not involve those studios sharing that information with us. But if they're at least sharing it with writers and actors, that's going to give a much better barometer just out into the world of which shows are actually successful and which aren't. And like, as you say, we just don't know a lot of that right now.
I mean, there's a lot about streaming that, now you look at it now that we've had, well, more than a decade of really, basically solid streaming everything on multiple platforms, and so much saturation of content out there that, sometimes I'm looking with a Netflix or Paramount Plus, and like, I don't even know like half of the names of these, whatever these episode series are. There's like no time to watch anything. But there, I just found it. There was a wonderful report on an article in New Yorker, and you can read it online here at newyorker.com. This is a very sobering read. It's basically, in view of what's happening right now between the striking and the just generally what's going on with the streaming model. It was basically talking about, you look back about 10 years ago, the big thing was Netflix with the House of Cards and Orange is the New Black, right? And they interviewed quite a few people from Orange is the New Black. They had no clue. They were compensated pennies. Like right now, like we're talking about residuals and everything. You would think, my God, this show was huge, enormous, biggest thing in the world. Netflix was riding the wave. Meanwhile, they're getting like $15-20 a year in residuals after the fact. So, look it up, because it kind of reflects on the whole streaming economy, if you will. And stuff needs to be changed.
Well, if you have $15,000 and a lot of free space to spare, Factory Entertainment's latest Star Trek product line might be for you. Launching at San Diego Comic-Con this year, Factory Entertainment is unveiling a new line of studio scale and studio quality Star Trek Starship models. Branded as the Factory Entertainment Masterworks line, models of the Enterprise refit from the motion picture, the Enterprise D, and the Excelsior will be available for pre-order beginning in a couple of weeks. Built by experts in their their field, these studio-sized models will be big, including full lighting and demonstrating the impressive skills and design of these magnificent Star Trek starships. In addition to the 3 revealed to date, a 4th ship will be announced later this summer. That price tag, though, is not cheap, but these kind of incredible studio-scale starship models never are. Marina, will you be selling a kidney to purchase one of these Factory Entertainment Masterworks starships?
In the word, no. Having said that, I can totally see how someone, for someone, this could be the Mona Lisa.
Yes.
This is something that they've been waiting for, the ultimate collectible. And if you can afford it, you have a place to put it and display it, more power to it. At this point, the collectible entity that is Star Trek, we have literally everything. I mean, look at all the things that Thingic at their height was able to come up with, what you would be just like, throwing your hands in the air and just going, my God, this is brilliant, just take my money. So yeah, obviously this is not the type of money that you can just it's like, I'm not gonna have my latte, I'd rather buy this. That's not the sort of thing. But still, I'm certain that they're not just doing this for the heck of it. There has to be research behind this, where they know that there will be sales, that there will be number of interested enough fans who will spend money on this. And I mean, I'm curious to know how they picked out the ships. Like, for example, I was surprised to see Excelsior. Marvelous ship, don't get me wrong. It's just like I'm wondering, like, why? What, like, is it because they kind of like thinking, oh, it's going to be the combination of the 1701 with the Excelsior, but then you have the D thrown in, and then I believe the 4th one's going to be announced at San Diego. I don't know. Is there going to be more? Hopefully, like once San Diego actually happens, we'll hear maybe a bit more details about what's what in the future. Is it just going to be these 4, which I doubt. I suspect that if they have enough confidence to do 4 very expensive ships like this, very, very expensive models, they must have some sort of future plans to proceed further along. I mean, if they do make a Voyager like this, my God, I would just cry, because there's just no way that I can afford this. Selling the kidney or not.
Yeah, I mean, there's clearly a market for it. Factory Entertainment are the 3rd company to try and do so, maybe even the 4th company to try and do something like this.
I have seen the QMX one.
Yeah,
and it looked beautiful. And
QMX
then, of course,
did them. Anovos did a line. To the best of my knowledge, they did fulfill those shortly after going out of business. There was also that one company that I can't remember their name. It was like Silver Screen Collectibles or something.
Yes, something like that.
They were doing a big Enterprise D before they went out of business. They never ended up fulfilling those. But like, there's clearly a market here, right? And like, yeah, I don't have $15,000 lying around. You don't have $15,000 lying around. Like, we're not the customers for this, but
there is a niche of the fandom, I feel, that, and again, this is something that's totally fine. And I mean, these people are actually the ones responsible for some of the props still being around and not being thrown away. If you look at the most recent big, like prop store level auctions, we have a lot of Trek collectibles.
Oh yes,
props, costumes going for incredibly, well, for an average fan, I suppose, staggering amounts of money.
And in some cases, a lot more than $15,000.
Oh, very much. I mean, oh gosh, what was it? The Resican flute.
Yes, $50,000.
Holy cow! You look at it, it's like, and I keep thinking every time I see the actual Resican flute that's out there, I keep remembering that moment when they interviewed Patrick Stewart about it in the video about the 2007 Christie's auction, where he just kind of giggled and he said, it doesn't play.
Yeah.
The actual prop, like, it wasn't an actual flute. But regardless, I mean, the plus side, again, it's those folks actually, they keep those props, they maintain them, they archive the paperwork, they clean the costumes, the whole thing is preserved. So, if they can afford to buy those the actual props, I'm sure that they would be probably interested.
Oh yes,
in that quality of a model that you can actually display in your office or whatever.
Oh, people will definitely buy this, and you don't need that many people to buy it for it to be profitable, right? 10 people buy a $15,000 starship that's $150,000.
I can totally see if you have an entire organization. I don't know, you have some fan club with like 100 people. Everybody throws in a little bit, and maybe they will have. Now we have our very own Enterprise D. TV that you can
everybody gets it for 4
put
days
in front
a
of the
year.
camera and it's gonna look as real. So yeah, but regardless, it's one of those things where I never say, "Oh my God, how much you paid for it?" It's none of my business. You got it. It made you. It's a thing that makes someone happy, and if you can, go for it.
Well, and lastly, this week we have the sad news to share about the passing of Star Trek Enterprise co-executive producer and showrunner for the 4th season, Manny Coto, who has passed away at the age of 62 after a battle with pancreatic cancer. Coto joined the Star Trek Enterprise writing staff in season 3 and took over as showrunner in the final season. He wrote or has story credits on 14 episodes of Star Trek, including Similitude, Azati Prime, The Council, United, and the 2-part series finale, Demons and Terror Prime. We send out our thoughts and prayers to Manny Coto's friends and family. Marina, what was your reaction to the death of Manny Coto?
It was so sudden, and like with every other sudden death, especially if you have someone who is still very much part of. I mean, he was proud to be part of the fandom. I don't remember the last time I saw him at a convention, but it's not like he continued on like everybody else. Like we still have Braga coming along to some of the events, and many of the other showrunners, producers, writers, part of the fandom. And it's kind of like losing a family member in a way. So, and again, 62, my goodness, that's like no age at all. But then again, we are talking about something that takes people very quickly. My maternal grandfather actually passed away from pancreatic cancer. It's once you're diagnosed, it can go extremely quickly.
Yeah.
In case of my grandfather, we're literally talking a matter of 4 months. So if I'm recalling correctly from the report, I mean, the year and a half that he battled it. So this is extremely sad. Because he'd still be around. I mean, he's such a talented writer.
Yeah.
I mean, besides Star Trek, American Horror Story, he did 24. He did a whole lot of things how many things he still could have done. So yeah, it's a very sad loss. A sad loss altogether. I mean, condolences to his family and his friends, and then of course condolences to our fandom. There were wonderful tributes from. I believe John Billingsley tweeted about this. Several others did. So it's very sad. And pancreatic cancer, in case those who are wondering, I mean, we have other family members, if you will, parts of Star Trek franchise who are very much concerned with the pancreatic cancer. And that would be Kitty Swink, Armin Shimerman, and Jonathan Frakes. They're very active in PanCan.
Kitty Swink is one of the few people who get diagnosed with pancreatic cancer and survive.
Yeah. So it kind of takes your breath away because there was just kind of it kind of hits you and you don't even know how to react at first. Very, very sad.
Yeah, this is real sad. I tweeted when the news came out that, and I feel this very strongly, that I think Star Trek Enterprise was great before Manny Coto, but I think Star Trek Enterprise was excellent because of Manny Coto.
There was a wonderful tweet that Rick Berman did, and I have it open, so I'm going to quote this. I'm going to read this. He said, "If we had been given a 5th season on Enterprise, Manny Coto would have lifted it to levels beyond my imagination. An extraordinarily talented writer and a lovely friend. How very sad." And what else can be said?
All right, well, we've talked about the facts, and now let's speculate on what's going to happen in the future of Star Trek.
You make some very good points, Captain. But it's still all speculation and theory.
So each week, my guests and I give you a wish or theory we're nurturing about any of the shows or the future of the franchise. So Marina, let's hear your theory or wish for this week.
I have 2. Now, all right. One is a more of an immediate nature, and it is kind of very obvious. I really want to hear sooner than later what exactly we can expect with STLV. Yes. So I do think that we will have a convention. I don't think whatever conspiracy theories that are lurking around online that, we don't have actors, so we don't have a convention. No, I think we're still going to have convention. We probably, most certainly, as a matter of fact, I am certain of this, we will have cancellations and we'll just have to deal with it and roll with the punches. But I would like to get some details. And I think, as I already mentioned before, we will hear something within the next 2 weeks as far as what will happen and what will not happen. So that's sort of like the immediate one. Generally speaking, my biggest wish is to hear where exactly Prodigy will land. Now, I keep track of everything that the Hegemons post, what Aaron Waltke posts. They both sound, well, all 3 of them sound very confident. There are things, probably work being done that we're not even aware of, even a fraction of it, as far as getting a Prodigy, at least the 2nd season of it, to stream on a different platform somewhere. So that's my biggest wish, that, sooner than later we'll actually hear, and we're back on, all Star Trek is present and available for watching, and Prodigy is going to be here. Where? That's a big question mark. Who knows? I mean, Amazon certainly saved quite a few series so far. Maybe it's going to end up on Hulu. I don't know enough about that side of things to even venture a guess. So, but it's my biggest hope is just to hear that, okay, we got it. It's landed. That's where you're going to watch it, and it's going to premiere mid next year, and I'll be happy.
Yeah, I mean, so there's been, like minimal progress, right? For some reason, CBS Home Entertainment have not yet formally announced it, but it certainly looks like September 26th is the date that we're going to get the last 10 episode of Prodigy on Blu-ray. It's available to pre-order pretty much everywhere. We'll do it as a proper story on WeeklyTrek and celebrate it appropriately once they formally announce it.
Yes, and hopefully we'll get the artwork and the whole thing.
Yeah, and know what the special features are. It's weird. It's been 10 days and they haven't done that yet. Aaron Waltke hosted it a week ago, and then I think the studio tapped him on the shoulder and told him to take it down, which he did. But now it's on Amazon and stuff, and the other Star Trek news sites have all run with it being available for pre-order, so it's out there, it's coming.
And it's the best way to show support, actually.
Yes.
If you feel like it's almost like massively coming back all of a sudden, because of all the issues that we faced with streaming in the last month.
Oh, sure.
Of let's just go back to buying physical media.
Yeah.
So, but that's a way to show that people are actually interested in watching this particular series. So, I am still tempted by that ridiculously overpriced popcorn bowl on StarTrek.com shop. But I'm like, you know what? I'm not too enamored with the action figures, primarily because I actually was waiting specifically, shocking, Janeway and Rock Talk, and that's the two that actually got canceled altogether. So, but Bonnie Gordon was at Shore Leave this past weekend, and something very similar came up. Somebody says what is going to happen? And so I think she kind of actually mentioned basically stuff in the things in the similar vein that, show the support by tweeting about it, the hashtag. It all kind of helps to keep it visible, keep popping. The thing on the change.org, where you can leave your signature, I think, is over 28,000 at the moment. So it's still bubbling up there.
More than Stranger Worlds one was.
Yeah. And she said, while she sees her immediate bosses very confident. So that's what kind of makes me feel a little bit better that, they're not abandoning it. They love it as much as we do, if not more. So yeah, my biggest wish, just to see that Prodigy is because it deserves it. It's brilliant Star Trek.
Yeah, I'd say it sounds to me like we are days away from a Blu-ray announcement. We're probably still months away from a season 2 announcement, but hey, I mean, I'm confident it's going to come out on home media. It's just a question of where and when, it sort of pops up.
I mean, ideally, it would be great. Like what happened with, correct me if I'm wrong, Expanse, was it when Amazon picked it up and then they immediately ordered another season? So I'm kind of hopeful that maybe something similar will happen to Prodigy, because it's beautiful in every possible way, the story and the production, so if somebody picks it up and was people are watching it, and can we have a third one, please? And yes, and more. There's so much stuff that can be done with animatics. Let's face it, I mean, animation gives you so much more leeway with who you can bring in, in terms of characters from legacy series and everything else. But I'm keeping my fingers crossed.
Me too. Well, my theory this week's actually, it is a listener submission. I got this in from Adam Uno, who's on Mastodon. You can find him at strange_new_worlds at 10forward.social. And he was actually sort of riffing on my commentary from a couple of weeks ago on Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, and the line about the movement of the eugenics wars in the timeline. I sort of was playing out this idea of well, does that actually sort of indicate the existence of multiple timelines and different ways of watching the Star Trek franchise? And Adam said, quote, "I connected the new Khan timeline to Spock's theory that time is fluid, like a river with currents, eddies, backwash from City on the Edge of Forever. The Time Warriors trying to prevent the creation of the Federation are attempting to divert the river. They might shift its path in a certain place, but the river is going to naturally return to its original path if it possibly can." And actually, that's a pretty good perspective on it. And I think is one that matches quite well with comments that were made by Strange New Worlds showrunner Akiva Goldsman, who told Cinema Blend in an interview that, quote, "This is a correct correction, because otherwise it's silly or Star Trek ceases to be in our universe. We want Star Trek to be an aspirational future. We want to be able to dream our way into a Federation as a Starfleet. I think that is the fun of it, in part, and so in order to keep Star Trek in our timeline, we continue to push dates forward. At a certain point, we won't be able to do that, but obviously, if you start saying the eugenics wars were in the 1990s, you're kind of effed for aspirational in terms of the real world. So Akiva seems to agree with you, Adam. Yeah, I think I agree with you too. I'm still sort of mulling it over in my mind. I think it's a really cool way, regardless of sort of what the wider implications to the Star Trek canon are. It is definitely a fun way of like addressing, you know, minor canon issues, not just in Strange New Worlds, but all across the franchise. Anyway, Marina, what do you think?
Well, because Star Trek subscribes to the multiverse model of the universe, it kind of makes sense that the time is this timey-wimey. what was the Doctor Who quote?
Yeah, timey-wimey, wibbly-wobbly.
No, but if you remember in The Year of Hell, when you have I mean, it's very two-dimensional, so it obviously was very crude representation, but they had like the actual, on the screens when Chakotay and Paris are on the time ship, and basically like showing all the like little exactly eddies and like little connections where you change this one tiny little thing, and like literally you change everything in, you know, the empires fall, and, you know, planets are destroyed, and just this one comet that was supposed to be there and it's not, and that's it, you ruined everything, the life never started. It kind of ties into this whole thing where, yeah, it's time is almost like space time, we probably should say, you know, it's space time. It's almost like a character, like it has its own moods, it has its own. So yeah, you shifted, you poked one thing and something else popped out elsewhere. Why not? It's possible. If you read, and yeah, again, since I'm more knowledgeable about Voyager, if you read any of the relaunch novels that written by Kirsten Beyer, and sorry, a quick aside, I got to see her again at Shore Leave, and yay, she's a god.
Yeah, she's great.
So, you know, there is that thing where when the Q confronts Catherine Janeway about, you know, and spoiler alert for those who haven't read it, she is reborn. And reasons for why she's reborn, you have to read the books.
You also have to read the books for why she's dead.
Yeah, and he basically, yeah, you know, everything is kind of ties into this. There's this horrible Borg attack at some point after Voyager came back. It's part of this particular timeline, if you will, of the memory beta, like things that happen in books that don't correspond to what happens on the screen. Think about it as a parallel universe if you want to. But, you know, the Q actually at some point after she's reborn, she says like, yeah, there was destruction, you know, billions of people died. And it all happened because you screwed with time. You came back, well, you know, Voyager came back 26 years earlier than it was supposed to. Something happened in the Delta Quadrant in those 26 years that prevented this from happening. You messed with time. Time paid you back. Well, rather, time made you pay back. You know, the humanity paid for it. So it's these kind of like, yeah, you get a headache when you think about how time works in that regard. But yeah, you know what? I read several versions with people kind of trying to kind of realign of what we know about the eugenics wars with the prime line as we know it running through the rest of the series. I still think it works. You know, especially like if you watch everything in production order, I think it's you can still kind of like put it in your head, like how, you know, this thing happened and now things that we saw in the 60s track got shifted by about 20-30 years. It sort of made sense.
Do you have a theory or a wish for Discovery, Section 31, Starfleet Academy, Strange New Worlds, Lower Decks, or Prodigy that you'd like to share? Tweet them to me at WeeklyTrek or email them to me at weeklytrek@thetricordertransmissions.com, and I might feature your theory on a future episode. Well, that's all the time we've got for this episode of Weekly Trek. Thank you so much to my guest, Marina Kravchuk, for joining me today. Marina, how can people contact you if they want to continue the conversation?
You can always find me on Facebook, my full name. Actually, I do try to use my full name mostly because, I mean, last name is unique enough. You can hardly mistake me for somebody else. I am on Facebook. I'm part of the administration team for the Star Trek Convention Experiences group. You can also find me on Twitter at Dracorex, DRAKKOREX. And the same handle is actually used pretty much elsewhere. So Mastodon, do not ask me to repeat it because I can never remember the rest of the handle. It's a very long one.
Did you join Threads yet, Marina?
Threads, yes. I just automatically clicked the button and it just kind of I have like 2 posts there. There's nothing else happening. I am on Instagram intermittently, and I am also now on Blue Sky, but that thing is just taking off. So it's we'll see where we are in like half a year. For now, my main ones still are probably the Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. So yes, and of course our little podcast with Jesse Okando, which we're coming and going. I have to admit, and I have to apologize to our regular listeners, we haven't recorded anything since the cruise, but you can find us also on Facebook, Shoreleaf, your Star Trek Convention community podcast, and at Shoreleaf on Twitter. We actually, just to give a shout out to our friends at Seventh Row and Virtual TrekCon, they are planning to do a virtual STLV pre-con day on Sunday. And, if you're listening to this after the fact, I'm sure the recordings will all be available because everybody's going to be casting either on Facebook or on YouTube. And it's basically going to be like a day-long discussion of, what we're hoping to see, what we're planning to see in Las Vegas this year. So, Shoreleaf is going to be actually starting out at 11 a.m., if I recall, Eastern time. So please check us out, and everybody else who's going to be taking part in the pre-con day. And that's really it for me.
And you can find this show on Twitter at WeeklyTrek, and me at Alexander T. Perry on Twitter, and at Alex T. Perry everywhere else. And if you enjoy the show, please consider leaving us a 5-star review on your podcast player of choice. And please check out some of the other great shows on the Tricorder Transmissions. And if you like our shows, please also consider becoming a Patreon of Tricorder, which you can find at patreon.com/the Tricorder Transmissions. And lastly, if you're looking for Star Trek news on the internet, I hope you will turn to trekcore.com. Well, thank you, Marina. Thank you to all of my listeners. And until next week, live long and prosper.